The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal and floating platforms where representatives from 47 civilizations gathered in the most important session in 12,000 years of recorded history. High Counselor Vayrith of the ancient membership called the assembly to order with a resonant pulse of bioluminescent light that cascaded across her translucent body, and the assembled representatives fell silent in their various ways. As the weight of the moment settled over them like a physical presence, we gather today to address the matter of species, classification 7741, commonly designating themselves as humanity. Vayrith's translator rendered her chemical communications into galactic standard as her words appeared simultaneously in 47 different languages across the floating displays. The evidence before this council is unprecedented in both scope and severity. Admiral Korath of the Zentari Empire stood at the prosecution platform with his 4 arms folded across his armored chest and his crest raised in the formal position of grave concern that his species reserved for matters of life and extinction. Honored members of the council, Korath began as holographic displays materialized around him, showing star charts and surveillance data accumulated over 3 centuries of observation. Humanity first achieved faster-than-light capability 147 years ago. By our calendar, and in that brief span, they have established colonies on 17 worlds, constructed military vessels that rival our own defensive fleets, and demonstrated a capacity for violence that exceeds any species we have encountered in living memory. The displays shifted to show human conflicts recorded from orbit during their pre-space era, when they still warred among themselves on their single world, with weapons that ranged from simple explosives to nuclear fire that scarred their own planet. These beings fought wars that killed millions of their own kind over resources, ideology, and territory. Korath continued as the images played out in disturbing detail. They poisoned their own atmosphere, depleted their oceans, and drove countless species on their world to extinction through simple negligence, and yet they survived, adapted, and eventually unified not through peace, but through the exhaustion of alternatives. Representative Kulmora of the Peaceful Contemplation spoke next, with her gentle voice carrying the weight of her civilization's 50,000 years of recorded pacifism. The pattern analysis troubles us deeply, she said as her small form seemed to shrink further into her robes. Every predictive model we have run suggests that humanity will follow the path of the Scourge races, and we all remember what the Scourge Wars cost our ancestors in lives and entire civilizations lost to the void. The chamber rippled with the equivalent of nervous agreement across dozens of different species as the ancient fear resurfaced in collective memory. Counselor Breakthrough of the Silicon Consensus added his computational perspective with streams of data flowing from his crystalline structure. Our probability engines calculate a 94.7% likelihood that humanity will initiate aggressive expansion within the next 2 centuries. Brechter stated with the absolute certainty that only a machine intelligence could project. Their population growth remains exponential, their resource consumption unsustainable, and their military research continues to accelerate at rates that suggest they are preparing for large-scale conflict. Representative after representative rose to present evidence, testimony, and analysis that painted humanity as an existential threat to the galactic order that had maintained peace for 6,000 years since the last Scourge race had been eliminated. There were a few voices of dissent, and Ambassador Lyrics of the Wandering Kindred stood to offer a different perspective with her feathered crest lowered in a gesture of uncertainty. We have not attempted contact, Lyrics argued with her voice carrying notes of musical concern. Every species we judge today, we observe from hiding without giving them the opportunity to know. They are being evaluated for survival, and how can we claim moral authority to exterminate a species we have never spoken to directly? High Counselor Vayrith Response carried the weight of ancient precedent and bitter experience. The Scourge races were given chances to join the galactic community, she said, as historical records displayed the catastrophic results of those attempts. Each time we reached out in peace, they responded by studying our weaknesses, reverse engineering our technology, and launching devastating attacks that cost billions of lives across dozens of worlds, and the Council was formed from the ashes of those mistakes with a single purpose: never again. The vote was called after 6 hours of debate, and the results appeared across the chamber's central display. With a clarity that left no room for doubt, 45 civilizations voted for immediate military action and only 2 abstained, with none opposing. The verdict is rendered. Vareth announced, with her bioluminescence pulsing in the formal pattern of solemn duty. Humanity is hereby classified as a Class 5 existential threat to galactic civilization, and the Council authorizes the assembly of a combined fleet with full extermination protocols to be executed at the earliest strategic opportunity. Admiral Korath bowed in acceptance of the command with his crest rising in the battle stance of the Zentari as he began calculating the logistics of the largest military operation in modern galactic history. The fleet would take 18 months to assemble and draw ships from a dozen civilizations with dreadnoughts from the Zentari, support carriers from the Peaceful Contemplation, weapons platforms from the Silicon Consensus, and specialized strike craft from 20 other species, each contributing their particular strengths to the Armada. The journey to Earth system would take another 3 years, even with the fastest FTL drives available, as humanity's home system lay far out in the unfashionable spiral arm of the galaxy where civilized species rarely ventured during those years of preparation. The Council's surveillance network continued monitoring Earth and humanity's colonies, with automated probes sending back regular updates on human activities and development. The reports showed continued expansion, with new colonies being established on marginal worlds and human ships, pushing further into unexplored space with what appeared to be either boldness or recklessness, depending on interpretation. Admiral Korath studied every report and analyzed every pattern as he planned the attack that would end humanity before they could threaten anyone beyond themselves. The fleet assembled at the rallying point of ancient victories where the Council's ancestors had gathered before their final battle against the last Scourge Race 3,000 years earlier. 1,200 ships formed up in battle formation as crews from incompatible biologies worked through translation systems and standardized protocols to function as a unified force. The departure ceremony was brief and somber, as this was not a mission of glory, but of grim necessity that the Council took no pleasure in, but accepted as the price of preserving everything they had built over millennia of careful cooperation and hard-won peace. The fleet jumped to FTL and began the 3-year journey across the galaxy toward the Sol system, where humanity lived in ignorant bliss, unaware that their extinction approached with overwhelming force and absolute determination. Admiral Korath stood on the command deck of his flagship as the stars stretched into lines of light and contemplated the burden of genocide, even when justified by survival and prophecy. 3 years passed in the compressed time dilation of faster-than-light travel, and the Council fleet emerged at the edge of the Sol system in perfect formation, with weapons charged and shields at maximum strength, ready for whatever resistance humanity might offer. Admiral Korath expected alarms and scrambling defense fleets, or desperate last-minute diplomacy, or even immediate attack from hidden weapon platforms scattered throughout the system's outer reaches. Instead, his sensor operators reported nothing but silence and empty space stretching before them like an abandoned graveyard. Scan again, Korath ordered with his crest lowering in confusion as he studied the tactical display that showed not a single active energy signature where there should have been thousands. Full spectrum analysis and active sensor sweeps. The Zentari sensor Master worked his controls with growing agitation as each scan confirmed what should have been impossible. Admiral, there are no ships. No active stations, no communication signals, no defense grids. The sensor master reported with his voice carrying an edge of uncertainty that Korath had never heard from the veteran operator. The system appears completely abandoned, Counselor. Varath, who had accompanied the fleet to witness humanity's end, spoke from her observation chamber with her bioluminescence flickering in patterns that suggested deep unease. This must be a trap, she said, as her chemical signals translated into words that echoed Korath's own thoughts. They detected our approach and have hidden their forces to ambush us. When we advanced deeper into the system, Korath ordered the fleet to proceed with maximum caution as scout ships moved ahead of the main formation and began detailed surveys of the outer planets and their moons where humanity had established mining operations and research stations. According to the surveillance records, the first scout to reach Neptune's orbit transmitted images that sent ripples of confusion through the command staff as the visuals showed the orbital processing facility that humanity had built 30 years ago to refine helium-3 from the gas giant's atmosphere. The facility was intact and structurally sound, but completely dark with no power signatures and no life signs as it drifted in a slowly decaying orbit that suggested it had been abandoned for years. Life support is offline, the scout pilot reported as his ship performed close-range scans. No atmosphere in the habitable sections, and no bodies either, as if the crew just left and took everything with them. Similar reports came in from Uranus and Saturn, where human mining colonies and research outposts stood empty and silent, like monuments to a civilization that had simply vanished. The fleet advanced to Jupiter, where humanity had established their largest off-world presence with orbital platforms around the planet and colonies on 3 of its moons that had supported populations in the tens of thousands, according to the last surveillance update from 5 years earlier. Korath led a landing party personally to the Europa colony, where humans had drilled 2 kilometers of ice to access the liquid ocean beneath, and established underwater research facilities that studied alien microorganisms in the lightless depths. The colony's surface installations were intact, but evacuated with equipment still in place, and living quarters that looked as if the inhabitants had packed only essentials and left everything else behind. The evacuation was organized and methodical, reported Commander Silith of the Peaceful Contemplation, as her team analyzed the colony's computer systems, which had been wiped clean of all data except basic maintenance logs. They had time to plan and execute this withdrawal, which means this was not a sudden emergency. The last maintenance log entry was dated 19 years earlier, according to the human calendar system, and simply read, "Final shutdown sequence complete, as all personnel departed on schedule for Project Exodus, Mars." Presented an even stranger picture as the planet's surface colonies showed signs of frantic construction activity in the years before. Abandonment with massive excavation projects and industrial facilities that had been built quickly and operated at maximum capacity before being shut down and left to the dust storms. They were building something huge, Korath observed as orbital scans showed the scale of the resource extraction that had stripped entire regions of the planet bare. These mining operations processed enough raw materials to construct hundreds of large vessels. But there were no shipyards in the Martian orbital space, and no records in the colony computers to indicate where the materials had gone or what they had been used to build. The fleet's intelligence analysts compiled the scattered evidence as they advanced toward Earth's moon, and the pattern that emerged was deeply troubling in its implications. They began evacuating the outer colonies approximately 20 years ago, reported Intelligence Director Kralik of the Silicon Consensus, as streams of data organized themselves into chronological order. The process was systematic and progressive, moving from the outer system inward, with the Mars colonies abandoned last about 15 years ago. Earth's moon had been humanity's first off-world colony and the site of their largest industrial base with underground cities that housed millions and manufacturing complexes that produced everything from consumer goods to military spacecraft. The orbital approach showed the moon's familiar, cratered surface unchanged from the surveillance images, but as the fleet's sensors penetrated beneath that surface, they revealed something that made even the most experienced officers react with shock. The moon was hollow, and not naturally hollow, but deliberately excavated as humanity had mined out the interior of their own satellite on a scale that defied comprehension. They removed approximately 40% of the moon's total mass. Kralik calculated with his crystalline structure, pulsing in what might have been the machine equivalent of disbelief. Hundreds of billions of tons of refined materials transported somewhere outside our surveillance network's coverage. Landing parties explored the vast empty chambers beneath the lunar surface where cities had been carved from living rock and then systematically dismantled, with every useful component removed and transported away. The tunnels stretched for thousands of kilometers in networks that connected massive caverns where factories had operated and residential districts had thrived before being stripped down to bare stone. Only in the deepest chambers did they find anything left behind, and what they found was a message clearly intended for whoever came looking. Carved into the wall of what had once been the colony's central administration chamber was text in both human language and galactic standard, script that someone had taken the time to translate perfectly. You are standing in the cradle we have left behind because we are leaving home, and we know why you have come. Admiral Korath read the message 3 times as the implications settled over him like physical weight, and he understood that humanity had known about the Council's surveillance and had prepared for the verdict that would have condemned them. Advance to Earth, he ordered, with his voice carrying none of its usual confidence. We need to understand what happened here. The blue-white sphere of Earth hung in space exactly as the surveillance images had shown it for 300 years, with clouds swirling over oceans and continents that looked unchanged and unmarred by war or catastrophe. As the fleet settled into orbit and sensors swept across the planet's surface, the terrible truth became undeniable as scan after scan confirmed the same impossible result. Earth was empty, and 11 billion humans had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a world of intact cities and functioning automated systems, still running in the absence of their creators. I want landing parties in every major population center, Korath commanded as he stared at the beautiful dead world below. Find me answers, and find me humans, or find me their bodies, because an entire species does not just disappear into nothing. But even as he gave the orders, Admiral Korath felt the cold certainty growing in his chest that humanity had done exactly that and had managed to accomplish in secret what should have been impossible to hide from the Council's vast surveillance network. They had abandoned Earth and vanished into the galaxy, leaving behind only an empty tomb and unanswered questions that carried the weight of the Council's greatest fear. The landing parties descended to Earth's surface in silence, broken only by the operational communications as military discipline fought against the profound wrongness of walking through populated cities that had no population. Commander Silith led her team into what had been New York and found streets where automated vehicles still ran their programmed routes, through empty intersections and buildings where lights turned on at scheduled times, in apartments where no one lived anymore. The city systems are still running on automatic, Silith reported as her team moved through a residential tower where furniture remained arranged and personal items sat on shelves as if the owners had simply stepped out for a moment. Power grid is stable and water treatment is functional, as if maintaining the city for inhabitants who will never return. Similar reports came from landing parties across the globe as teams explored Beijing and Mumbai and Sao Paulo and Lagos, finding the same eerie preservation everywhere they looked in. London, they found parks where robotic gardeners still trimmed grass and tended flower beds that bloomed for no one to see. Tokyo, they discovered automated factories producing goods that accumulated in warehouses with no one to buy or use them. Every city told the same story of organized evacuation and careful preservation, as if humanity wanted to leave their home world intact, even as they abandoned it forever. Admiral Korath established his command center in Geneva, where the old United Nations complex stood empty, with flags of 200 nations still flying over buildings where humanity had once governed itself. Focus on government archives and military installations, Korath ordered, as he assigned teams to specific search objectives: universities, research facilities, anywhere they might have kept records of what they were planning. The breakthrough came from a team exploring a military bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains in what had been the United States, where they found computer systems that had been left active, with files that had not been deleted but instead carefully organized and indexed as if waiting to be discovered. Admiral, you need to see this, the team leader reported as he transmitted the first set of files. They left us a complete record of everything. The archive began 73 years earlier with intercepted signals from Council surveillance probes that humanity's deep space monitoring network had detected by accident when one probe malfunctioned and emitted a diagnostic pulse on frequencies human sensors happened to be scanning. The initial discovery reports showed human confusion and excitement as their scientists realized they were not alone in the galaxy, and then growing concern as further analysis revealed the surveillance network's scope and obvious purpose. They knew they were being watched, Korath said as he reviewed the files with Counselor Veyrath observing from her chamber, and they understood immediately that the Watchers had hostile intent. The archive showed how humanity had carefully concealed their discovery while secretly dedicating immense resources to understanding the Council's technology as human intelligence. Agencies captured and reverse-engineered additional probe systems over the following decades. 40 years after first detection, humanity achieved a breakthrough that allowed them to intercept and decode Council communications, including the regular reports sent back to Council space about human activities and development. The Yosuda days and development. The archived communications made for chilling reading as human analysts translated Council debates about whether humanity posed a threat and what should be done about them before they became too dangerous to eliminate. They read our discussions of their extermination, Veyrath said, with her bioluminescence dimming to near darkness. They knew we were coming for them decades before we voted. The archive showed the turning point 31 years earlier when human cryptographers decoded a Council communication that explicitly discussed timetables for assembling an extermination fleet, and humanity's leaders faced the reality that they had perhaps 50 years before the Council attacked. The documents showed desperate debates in secret councils as human governments argued about how to respond to the existential threat they had discovered. Some advocated revealing themselves to the Council and attempting peaceful contact, while others wanted to prepare for war, and a few suggested hiding or fleeing to worlds beyond Council space. The decision was made in a closed session of the Emergency Global Security Council, with the vote recorded in the archive, along with the reasoning that led to it. We cannot fight them because we are one species against 47 civilizations with technology centuries ahead of ours. The summary document read, "We cannot hide on Earth because they already know where we are and will come for us eventually. And we cannot trust them to accept us peacefully when their entire surveillance apparatus was designed to identify and eliminate threats before they emerge. Therefore, we choose the fourth option, which no one has suggested, because it seems impossible. But we are human, and we have built civilizations and conquered our world and reached for the stars against every obstacle nature and our own worst instincts could place before us. We will disappear completely, as we will evacuate our entire species from Earth and scatter to the galactic winds in ways the Council cannot track or predict, and we will make them. Believe they found us too late and discovered only an empty grave where a species died of natural causes before they could become the threat the Council feared. This is Project Exodus. The archive detailed the massive undertaking that followed, as humanity secretly diverted resources on a scale that strained their entire civilization to its limits. They built construction facilities in the Oort cloud at the very edge of the solar system, where Council surveillance was weakest and where objects could hide among billions of comets and ice fragments. They mined the Moon and Mars and the asteroids for raw materials while maintaining normal activity on Earth to avoid suspicion. They developed new propulsion technology based on reverse-engineered Council systems but modified with innovations the Council had never considered because human engineers approached problems differently than species who had followed more conventional technological development paths. The new drives left no warp signature that Council sensors could detect and operated on principles that made the ships effectively invisible to standard tracking methods. They built 10,000 ships. Intelligence Director Kralik reported as the archive revealed technical specifications and construction logs, each designed to carry between 1 and 3 million humans in multi-generational colony configurations. The vessels were massive, far larger than anything humanity had built before, and each was essentially a mobile city-state with complete life support systems, agricultural facilities, manufacturing capability, and everything needed to maintain a viable population for centuries of travel. The archive showed the evacuation timeline as humanity slowly depopulated Earth over a 20-year period with people leaving quietly in small groups to avoid detection, while those who remained maintained normal activity levels in cities that became increasingly empty behind the facade. They called their departure groups by city names. Silith reported from another section of the archive. The New York group departed 8 years ago, carrying 3 million people to coordinates unknown, and the Beijing group left 6 years ago. With 2 million and on, it goes through every major population center. The final phase of the evacuation had been the most carefully choreographed, as the last 10 million humans departed Earth in groups spaced over 2 years, while automated systems were programmed to maintain the appearance of normal activity for decades. After the last person left, the last human to leave Earth had been someone named Sarah Chun, and her log entry was included in the archive with her words simple and direct. I have locked the door behind me as the lights are on and the systems are running, but there is no one left to see them, and by the time anyone finds this message, we will be scattered across 1,000 worlds that you will never find. But the archive saved its most devastating revelation for the final section, where humanity addressed their message directly to whoever found Earth, to the Galactic Council. The document began, "You are reading this because you came to exterminate us and found us already gone. So let us be clear about what has happened and why. We know you watched us for 3 centuries, and we know you judged us unworthy of existence, because we were too violent and too dangerous and too aggressive by your standards of what peaceful species should be. Perhaps you were right to fear us, but you made the mistake of deciding to eliminate us without ever speaking to us or giving us the chance to prove we could be better than our history suggested. You chose extermination over communication, and in doing so you created exactly what you feared most. We have scattered into the galaxy, and we will establish colonies on worlds you have never surveyed and integrate into civilizations you do not control, and we will grow and adapt and survive, because that is what humans do. You could have had us as allies or neutral neighbors, but instead you will have us as ghosts in your perfect galactic order. We are everywhere and nowhere, and you will spend generations looking over your shoulders, wondering when we will return and what we will have become. This is the future you chose when you decided we did not deserve. The command center in Geneva became a hub of frantic analysis as Council intelligence officers from a dozen species worked to understand the full scope of what humanity had accomplished, and more importantly, where they might have gone. Intelligence. Director Kralik assembled his team of specialists around a holographic display that showed the galaxy in 3 dimensions, with Earth at the center and theoretical dispersal patterns radiating outward in every direction, like spokes from a wheel. We have identified 10,247 colony ships from the construction logs. Kralik reported his data streams organized themselves into coherent patterns. Each ship departed on a different heading, and none of them followed predictable routes or used standard navigation coordinates. The hologram showed the trajectories that humanity's ships had taken as they left the Sol system, with each one diverging from the others at angles calculated to maximize dispersal. They were not simply fleeing. Kralik continued as the analysis deepened. They were executing a deliberate strategy to make themselves impossible to track or eliminate as a coordinated effort. Commander Silith added her analysis from the peaceful contemplation's perspective. With her species, having spent millennia studying migration patterns and population dynamics, each ship carried sufficient genetic diversity to establish a viable colony. She explained as biological data supplemented the trajectory information. They separated family groups and ensured that each ship had complete copies of human knowledge and technology, along with different cultural traditions and languages. They were not preserving humanity as a unified civilization. She continued, they were creating thousands of separate human civilizations that would develop independently and adapt to whatever worlds they settled. Admiral Korath studied the dispersal pattern with growing unease as the implications became clear and undeniable. How many of them can we track? He asked, though he already suspected the answer. None. Kralik replied with his crystalline structure pulsing in frustration. Their drive technology leaves no detectable warp signature, and they departed between 20 and 2 years ago, which means they have had decades to reach destinations thousands of light years from here in any direction. The hologram expanded to show the volume of space that humanity could have reached in the time since departure, and the scale was staggering as billions of cubic light years of galactic territory fell within the possible range. There are approximately 400 million star systems within the potential settlement zone, Kralik calculated. Of those, perhaps 60 million have planets that could support human life with varying degrees of terraforming or environmental adaptation. Counselor Vayrith spoke from her chamber with her bioluminescence flickering in patterns that suggested she was struggling to process the magnitude of the problem. We have surveyed less than 2% of those systems, she said, as the weight of the Council's failure settled over everyone present. We do not know which worlds are inhabited by undiscovered civilizations, or which might be suitable for human colonization, and we lack the resources to search them all, even if we devoted our entire civilization to the task for the next 1,000 years. Ambassador Lyrics of the Wandering Kindred, who had opposed the extermination vote, spoke with unusual sharpness in her voice. We created this situation through our arrogance, she said as her feathered crest rose in accusation. We assumed we could judge and eliminate a species without consequence, but now we have scattered them across the galaxy with every reason to hate us and the knowledge that we intended to exterminate them. The debate that followed revealed deep fractures in the Council's unity, as species that had voted together for extermination now argued about how to respond to failure. Some wanted to increase surveillance and search for human colonies, while others advocated attempting peaceful contact if humans were found. But a significant faction insisted that the threat remained valid and any human settlements should be destroyed immediately. We cannot even agree on what we want to do, Admiral Korath observed during one particularly heated exchange. which means we cannot respond effectively to what is already a catastrophic failure of galactic security. The first confirmed report of human presence beyond Earth arrived 3 months after the fleet returned to Council space, and it came from a remote trading post on the edge of explored territory. A merchant vessel had encountered a ship of unknown configuration that used technology inconsistent with any known species. But when challenged, the crew had identified themselves as human and offered to trade before jumping away when the merchant requested they remain for inspection. They've already spread further than we anticipated, Kralik noted as the report was analyzed, and they are actively engaging with galactic civilization rather than hiding completely. More reports followed in the subsequent months as evidence of human presence accumulated from across the galaxy. Like pieces of a puzzle that revealed a picture the Council had not anticipated: a frontier colony on a world the Council had surveyed and classified as uninhabited, reported finding structures that analysis suggested were less than 10 years old, and built with technology that matched human design principles from the archived Earth records. A civilization-seeking council membership mentioned in their application that they had received technological assistance from mysterious benefactors who called themselves the diaspora and taught them advanced agricultural techniques in exchange for shelter and supplies. An automated monitoring station near the galactic core detected what might have been human communication protocols, though the signal was heavily encrypted and vanished before it could be traced. They are not hiding, Silith realized as she studied the pattern of sightings and reports. They are integrating into the existing galactic civilization in ways we never anticipated. The archived records from Earth provided context for what humanity was doing, as their strategic documents had outlined multiple approaches to surviving in a hostile galaxy. Some colony ships were instructed to find isolated worlds and establish independent civilizations that would develop in secret for generations before revealing themselves. Other ships were directed to make contact with primitive species and uplift them with human technology in exchange for alliance and mutual protection. Still, others were supposed to infiltrate existing civilizations by disguising their human nature and integrating into alien societies where they could work from within. We cannot counter this, Korath admitted during a strategy session with his senior staff. We do not know where they are or what they are doing, and by the time we identify a human presence, they have already established themselves in ways that make elimination politically or militarily impossible. The archive had included extensive files on Council species that humanity had analyzed from intercepted communications, and the level of detail was disturbing as it showed how thoroughly humans had studied their potential enemies. They knew which Council species were vulnerable to biological agents and which had fractures in their political unity that could be exploited. They had identified weaknesses in Council military doctrine and developed counter-strategies for every major weapon system and defensive technology the Council possessed. They had mapped out Council communication networks and identified key infrastructure that could be disrupted to cause maximum chaos with minimum force. They have been preparing for war with us for 30 years, Korath said as he reviewed the military analysis files. Not because they wanted war, but because they knew we were coming for them, and they prepared for every contingency. But the most disturbing files were the ones that outlined humanity's long-term strategy for survival and eventual dominance in a galaxy that had rejected them. The documents spoke of patient growth and careful expansion as human colonies would establish themselves slowly and avoid drawing attention while building strength. They discussed the advantages of genetic diversity and cultural flexibility, as humans could adapt to almost any environment or social structure while maintaining their core identity. They predicted that within 500 years humanity would be the most widespread species in the galaxy simply through population growth and colonial expansion, while the Council species with their slower reproduction and more conservative approach to settlement would find themselves gradually outnumbered. This was never just about survival, the Wrath said as she absorbed the implications. This was about turning our attempt at extermination into an advantage they could exploit. We freed them from their cradle world and gave them a reason to spread as far and fast as possible. She continued, and we ensured they would never trust us or accept peaceful coexistence because we chose extermination over communication. Admiral Korath stood before the tactical display showing the galaxy with its billions of stars and uncounted worlds and tried to comprehend the magnitude of what the Council had unleashed somewhere out there among those stars. 15 billion. Humans were establishing new homes and building new civilizations and teaching their children that the Galactic Council had tried to exterminate them before they could pose a threat. We created our own nightmare, Korath said quietly, and now we have to live with the consequences. The Galactic Council chamber that had voted unanimously for humanity's extermination now fractured into competing factions that could barely agree on basic facts, much less coordinated policy, as representatives shouted across the crystalline platforms in 47 different languages, while translators struggled to keep pace with the chaos. High Counselor Verath called for order repeatedly, but her bioluminescent pulses were drowned out by the fury and fear that had gripped the assembly. Since Admiral Korath delivered his full report on the disaster at Earth, we must hunt them down wherever they appear, demanded Counselor Breakter of the Silicon Consensus as streams of data flowed from his crystalline form. Every confirmed human settlement must be destroyed immediately before they can establish sufficient strength to threaten Council space. Ambassador Lyrics rose in opposition with her feathered crest raised in disgust at the suggestion. More violence will only prove to humanity that they were correct to flee from us. She argued, we must seek peaceful contact and attempt to build trust with whatever human colonies we discover and offer them membership in the galactic community. Representative Quilmora of the Peaceful Contemplation spoke with unusual force. Behind her gentle voice, how do you build trust with a species you attempted to exterminate? She asked. What possible reason would humans have to believe any offer we make when our first action was to vote for their complete annihilation without ever speaking to them directly? The debate raged for days as the Council struggled with the reality that their carefully maintained peace had been shattered by their own preemptive action against a species that might never have threatened anyone. If left alone, meanwhile, reports continued flooding in from across the galaxy as more evidence of human presence surfaced in systems far from Earth. A scientific expedition to study primitive life on a distant world discovered a small human settlement of perhaps 10,000 people living in harmony with the local ecosystem and following sustainability practices that put Council environmental standards to shame. When approached peacefully, the humans had been cautiously friendly and willing to trade knowledge for supplies, but they had refused to reveal where their colony ship had originated or whether other human settlements existed nearby. They had learned to be careful with us, Commander Silith reported after analyzing the contact transcript. They engage when beneficial but reveal nothing that could be used to track or threaten other human populations. A frontier defense station detected an unidentified vessel, matching human design specifications traveling through Council space at speeds that should have been impossible with their assumed technology level. When intercepted, the ship's captain identified herself as human and explained they were simply passing through on a trading mission between two non-Council civilizations. The captain had been polite and cooperative, but when questioned about her origins, she claimed to be from a colony so far outside Council space that its location was irrelevant to Council security concerns. They have ships we cannot catch using technology we do not understand, Admiral Korath noted grimly, and they move through our territory with impunity because we lack the legal or practical authority to stop them. More disturbing were the reports from Council member species who were beginning to question the official narrative about humanity. Young politicians on several worlds had accessed the public records of the extermination vote and were asking uncomfortable questions about why the council had decided to eliminate an entire species without attempting peaceful contact. First, reform movements were gaining strength in some civilizations as citizens demanded their governments adopt more transparent and accountable procedures for evaluating potential threats. The humans are undermining our political stability without firing a shot, Vareth observed as she reviewed the intelligence summaries. Their mere existence as victims of our failed extermination attempt has become a rallying point for dissent within our own civilizations. The situation deteriorated further when a point for dissent within our own civilizations. The situation deteriorated further when a Tidrian human trade delegation appeared at a neutral space station and requested formal meeting with council representatives. The delegation consisted of 5 humans claiming to represent 7 different colony groups scattered across 2,000 light years. And they came with a proposal that sent shockwaves through the council leadership. We wish to establish formal diplomatic relations with the Galactic Council, the delegation leader stated during the recorded meeting, not as subjects or supplicants, but as sovereign representatives of independent human civilizations. The proposal outlined a framework where human colonies would be recognized as legitimate settlements with rights to self-governance and territorial integrity in exchange for agreements not to aggressively expand into council-claimed space or interfere with council-member civilizations. We understand you fear us, the human diplomat said with remarkable directness. You have made that abundantly clear through your actions and your attempted extermination of our entire species when we were confined to a single system. But we are no longer confined, and you cannot eliminate us and you cannot ignore us, so you must decide whether you want us as potential allies who respect established boundaries or as enemies who have every reason to work against your interests wherever we encounter them. The council's response was predictably divided, as some saw the proposal as an opportunity to contain humanity through diplomacy, while others viewed it as an admission of weakness that would only encourage human expansion. No consensus could be reached, and the human delegation departed after 3 weeks of fruitless negotiation with a simple statement that they would continue establishing colonies and conducting trade regardless of council approval. They do not need our permission anymore, Korath observed. They have already achieved what we feared and spread beyond our ability to control or eliminate them. The intelligence reports grew more alarming as the months passed and the scope of human expansion became clearer. A previously unknown civilization contacted the council to apply for membership, and their application revealed they had received significant technological assistance from human advisors who would help them develop faster-than-light capability decades ahead of their natural progression. When questioned, the applicant species showed no fear of humans and instead spoke of them as generous teachers who asked for nothing but friendship and the occasional resupply of their ships. The humans are building a network of allied species outside council oversight, Intelligence Director Kralik reported. They are creating their own sphere of influence in regions we have not fully explored or incorporated into the galactic community. Attempts to track human movements through the monitoring network proved futile as their ships continued to avoid detection and their colonies remained hidden among the billions of unexplored systems. Few human settlements that were discovered seemed to have been deliberately revealed, as if humanity wanted the council to know they were present but not where all their people had gone. A survey team searching a cluster of systems near the galactic rim found something that crystallized all the council's fears into a single monument that stood as testimony to their failure. On an unremarkable planet orbiting an average star, they discovered a human colony that had been established 15 years earlier and grown to a population of 2 million with cities spreading across 3 continents at the colony's central plaza stood a monument of dark stone carved with text in dozens of languages, both human and alien. The monument's inscription was translated and transmitted back to the council, where it was read in the great chamber before an assembly that had fallen into shocked silence. Here stands the first monument to the great diaspora when humanity scattered to the stars. The inscription read, "We fled not from war or disaster, but from those who judged us unworthy of existence before we could prove our worth." The Galactic Council came to our home with overwhelming force, intending to exterminate every man and woman and child of our species, because they feared what we might become. They arrived to find us already gone, as we had known they were coming, and we chose survival over subjugation. We do not know if the Council will ever accept us as equals, or if they will continue seeking our elimination, but we know this. We are human, and we survive, and we will not live in fear of those who condemned us without knowing us. To any who read this monument, know that you stand on free human soil, and that we claim the right to exist, regardless of whether others grant us that right. We were scattered across the galaxy by those who feared us, but we will endure and grasp. One day, we will be strong enough that none can threaten our existence again. This is our promise and our warning. We are here, and we are everywhere, and we will not be extinguished. The monument was signed with the names of the colony's founders and the date of settlement calculated in both human and galactic standard calendars. Below the main inscription was a shorter text added more recently, according to geological analysis of the carving. To the Galactic Council, you wanted to end us before we became dangerous. It read, "Congratulations on creating exactly what you feared." Admiral Korith read the report of the monument's discovery while standing on the bridge of his flagship as it patrolled Council space on routine security operations that felt increased.